When you buy organic vegetables in a store, is it really true organic vegetables, fruit, organic? I'm basically vegan. I am vegan, and uh, I stay away from meat. And plus, I was raised on a farm, and I'm in my 70s. So, the farming was better back then. They didn't have this here industrial farming. And what about the industrial fish? Isn't that just as bad as the corporate beef? Thank you, Ronnie.
Thank you. Yes, well, fish farming is for the most part, it's like factory farming of animals. It's like these are not healthy products. One of the worst, take salmon, for example, which I love wild Alaskan salmon. And I eat it every chance I get. But when you see salmon in the grocery store or on a restaurant menu, you typically, you don't know what you're getting. Most of the time, what you're getting are factory farmed, fish farmed salmon that have been sprayed with pesticides that are being fed, rendered animal protein that are one of the unhealthiest foods there are. But when you ask, if I'm in a restaurant in the US and I ask the waiter, well, I see you have salmon on the menu. Is that wild Alaskan salmon or is that fish farm? Well, they don't know. They go back and ask, and you can't always believe what the manager has told them and so on. So you got to read beyond labels and educate yourself. And my rule of thumb, I was a vegetarian for 40 years, but I started eating meat that was raised regeneratively and organically, grass-fed, pasture-raised in 2010, about 12 years ago. But I just assume that it's factory farm because 90% of it is, or 95%. And so I don't eat meat and animal products in a restaurant unless I know what's going on, unless I know the restaurant manager or, it's on the menu and labeled. I just avoid it. And if I'm going to purchase meat or animal product, I like to do it directly from the farmer, if at all possible. And then if that's not possible, a co-op or a natural food store that will answer your questions and be transparent. So we got to read beyond labels. In general, you can trust the organic label, but that's in general. There is fraud. There are problems. That's why if you can get to know your farmers and ranchers, get involved in CSAs, go to the farmers market. It's fun going to the farmers market. Talk to the people, visit the farms, start to grow a little bit yourself. You'll find that it's fun being an investigative consumer, reading beyond the labels. But if you can at all possible avoid that highly processed factory farm food, we need to start thinking now about the packaging. I mean, it's something you didn't used to have to deal with. I mean, you went to the grocery store when I was a kid and, you saw the meat department, you saw what you wanted. They wrapped it in paper, you took it home. I mean, nowadays, everything's encased in plastic. It turns out these PFAS chemicals, these forever chemicals they're in everyone's bloodstream. They're screwing up our immune systems. I mean, you eat healthy food, you do the healthy things, but you find it really hard to lose weight, for example, which is the situation for a lot of us. And you're still doing everything right. Well, now we realize there's chemicals in the environment that screw up your metabolism, that make it very hard. And you got to start thinking about that too. So the packaging, the plastics, where you buy something from. These are all part of it. Think of it as an adventure. Every time you go out, and I'm going to do the best job I can to find the best food for myself and my family. I'm going to try to not waste money. I'm going to try to, 35% of the food in America is wasted. That's one reason why people think organic is expensive. You have to do what my grandmother did, or most of our grandmothers: cook in quantity and save the leftovers and get creative, and get away from this plastic packaging and these other toxic implications of what we're eating.
Thank you for that, Ronnie. And I'm going to bring in, we have just a few more minutes before our next lecture. And we are, again, what a privilege to have you here and answering these questions. I'm going to bring now Bin in, and welcome, Bin.
Thank you very much. Give me time to ask a question. I got one question is about the sleep. How many hours is better for people to get good sleep, than to get good health?
So how many hours of sleep does Ronnie recommend for people getting better health?
Yes.
Okay. Well, for 8 hours, I think 8 hours for most people. When you get a little older, like me, you can get by on 7 hours. And certainly sleep, what I find is, like, it's not a question of just, well, I'm going to go to sleep at 10 o'clock and, I'm going to wake up at 6 o'clock or whatever. It's like, if I haven't gotten enough exercise during the day, if I haven't cleared my head of all these conflicts and problems, it's very hard for more and more of us to go to sleep and to get the sleep we need. So it's very important that we get enough sleep, but it's very important that we realize what will enable us to get sleep. And you don't want to be taking sleeping pills that damage your liver just so that you can sleep through the night. It's much better to look at your whole lifestyle and figure out, what am I eating? How much exercise am I getting? What are my thoughts? How much time am I spending looking at these screens, phones and computers, compared to being out there in nature and so on? So great question.
And yes, Ben, thank you very much for that question. And Ronnie, we have a couple of minutes left. I'm not seeing any other hands at the moment, but I've got a question for you. I'm looking at a list of different myths that you've commented on in the past, and I'm curious if you could comment again on GM crops and the increased yield potential. Obviously, one of the arguments for GM crops. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's no such thing as a genetically modified crop that is not accompanied by a toxic chemical and a toxic chemical fertilizer. If there were, we'd be having a different discussion. But if, say, a GMO cornfield can produce more corn than an organic cornfield, well, I mean, that, you look at, but what about the pesticides that were sprayed on it, the Roundup that got into the water that then you consume, or so on? And you don't want to have monoculture. You want to have a variety of different foods produced in that. So it's like Vandana Shiva says, you want to look at nutrition per acre, not yield per acre, and you don't want poison in that yield. So I talk about genetically engineered crops and the toxic chemicals that always accompany them. And if someone wants to tell you that's a good idea, well, they're going to have to explain the toxic chemical part and the chemical fertilizer part. And they can't do that. They point to misleading statistics that have no meaning. Most GMOs are not used for human food at all. They're used for ethanol. They're used for food for animals in factory farm confinement. They're used for things like high fructose corn syrup from sugar beets, or that you don't want to be eating at all.